The emergency lights cast a sickly green pallor across the scout ship's bridge, their rhythmic pulsing a mockery of life support systems struggling to maintain functionality. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the edge of her command console, her knuckles white beneath skin mottled with bruises and radiation burns. Outside the reinforced viewport, the remnants of humanity's orbital defense network drifted like broken glass, shattered, silent, defeated. 36 hours earlier, the Karaxian invasion had begun with a precision that defied comprehension. Their first wave had neutralized Earth's early warning systems with a quantum disruption pulse that rendered most defensive technologies worse than useless. Entire satellite networks became instant graveyards, communication grids collapsed, and military command structures dissolved into chaos within minutes. Elena remembered the initial briefing. Admiral Harrison's weathered face, usually a bastion of calm, had been ashen as he described the incoming threat. "They're not like anything we've encountered," he'd said, his voice a rasp of barely contained terror. "Our entire technological paradigm means nothing to them." The scout ship Defiant had been a last-minute escape vessel, cobbled together from spare parts and pure desperation. Its experimental stealth systems, a project Elena had championed for years, were the only reason they'd survived the initial onslaught. As she reviewed the ship's diagnostic screens, a bitter laugh escaped her lips. Years of being called a technological dreamer by military bureaucrats, and now these same technologies were humanity's final whisper of hope. A soft beep interrupted her thoughts. The encrypted data cache she'd managed to download during their escape was finally decrypting. Her fingers, trembling slightly, accessed the file. The transmission was from Dr. Rebecca Chen, lead researcher at the Quantum Frontier Research Facility and Marcus Chen's sister. The video was fragmented, damaged, but still coherent. "Elena, if you're seeing this, it means our last case protocol is active." Rebecca's holographic image flickered, her usually pristine lab coat torn and singed. The Karaxian invasion isn't just a military operation. It's something far more systematic. Our initial analysis shows. The transmission cut, then resumed. Complete resource consumption. They don't just conquer. They strip entire planetary systems down to their fundamental components. Another flicker. More static. The key is in the logistical network. Their strength is also their greatest weakness. Marcus will understand. Tell him. The transmission dissolved into electronic noise. Elena's mind raced. Marcus Chen, the brilliant, disgraced physicist who'd been expelled from the scientific community for theories too radical, too impossible to be taken seriously. The same Marcus who was now humanity's best, perhaps only, hope. A proximity alarm screamed. Elena's hands flew across the console, engaging the ship's quantum camouflage. Outside, a massive Karaxian patrol vessel, its obsidian hull easily a kilometer long, drifted past. Sensor tendrils extended from its surface like metallic tentacles, probing the darkness for any sign of resistance. She held her breath. One misalignment in the stealth field, one tiny fluctuation, and they'd be vaporized before they could even register as a threat. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The alien vessel moved on, leaving behind only the cold silence of recently conquered space. Elena accessed the ship's limited communication systems. Their range was microscopic, their power nearly depleted. But she had one transmission to make, a coded message to the few remaining resistance contacts, a breadcrumb of hope. "Sanctuary Protocol," she whispered, her fingers dancing across the encrypted frequency. "Initiating recovery sequence. Locate Dr. Marcus Chen. Repeat. Locate Dr. Marcus Chen." As the message disappeared into the vast, indifferent darkness, Captain Elena Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of grief for the billions lost, a moment of fear for what was to come, and then a moment of determination that would become the spark of humanity's resistance. The Karaxian Imperium believed they had won. They were about to learn the true meaning of human resilience. The underground research bunker hummed with a desperate energy that felt more alive than the devastated world above. Dr. Marcus Chen stared at the holographic display, his fingers tracing complex quantum entanglement patterns that danced like living fractals. Surrounding him was a motley crew of the most brilliant and most broken minds humanity could assemble. To his left, Zura Kim hunched over a bank of quantum processors, her cybernetic eye flickering with lines of code that would have driven a normal human mind to madness. Once a top-tier AI specialist for the United Nations Computational Defense Force, she'd lost everything in the first wave of the Cariaxian invasion. Her family, her team, her purpose. Now purpose had found her again. "We're not just talking about a blockade," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "We're talking about weaponizing the fundamental structure of resource distribution." The bunker was a testament to human desperation and ingenuity. Salvaged technology from a dozen different research facilities created a patchwork of computational power. Quantum computers cannibalized from military research centers sat alongside repurposed satellite communication arrays. Every piece of equipment bore the scars of humanity's last stand: burn marks, hastily welded repairs, emergency patches. A sudden transmission crackled through their encrypted channel. Captain Elena Rodriguez's voice, filtered through multiple layers of quantum encryption, carried a weight of exhaustion and determination. "Chen, are you receiving? I've got a data package from Rebecca. It's fragmented, but there's something here. Something big." Marcus's hands moved with a surgeon's precision, pulling apart the encrypted transmission. Rebecca's final research notes began to take shape, a complex analysis of the Cariaxian logistical network that was more a work of art than a scientific document. "Look at this," he called out to Zora. "The Cariaxian supply chain isn't just a military network. It's a living ecosystem. Each resource transfer is like a biological process. They've engineered a system so efficient that it's become a vulnerability." Zora's cybernetic eye zoomed in, analyzing the data streams. "A monoculture," she said softly. "They've optimized their entire civilization to such a degree that any significant disruption could cause a cascading failure." The implications were staggering. The Cariaxian Imperium had created the most efficient resource distribution system in galactic history, and in doing so, had built the perfect weapon against themselves. A new team member approached, Dr. Aisha Okoye, a logistical systems expert who had survived by hiding in the ruins of a Nigerian space research facility. Her hands were covered in complex tattoos that were actually quantum computing interfaces, a cutting-edge technology that allowed her to interact with computational systems through her own bioelectric field. "It's like a massive organism," Aisha explained, her fingers dancing across a holographic display. "Each supply route is a neural pathway. Disrupt enough of these pathways, and the entire system begins to break down." Marcus nodded, a plan forming. "We're not going to fight the Cariaxian Empire with weapons. We're going to fight them with mathematics, with information, with the very system they've perfected." Outside the bunker, the world remained a graveyard. Cities reduced to ash, orbital platforms drifting like cosmic tombstones. But inside this hidden facility, something was stirring. A resistance that would not be measured in soldiers or ships, but in calculations and quantum probabilities. Zora looked up, her cybernetic eye casting a blue-green light across her determined face. "How soon can we begin?" Marcus Chen smiled, the first genuine smile since the invasion began. "We've already started." The whispers of resistance had become a roar. The first blockade platform looked like nothing more than a piece of space debris, a twisted fragment of metal no larger than a shipping container. But within its scared exterior lay the most sophisticated piece of technology humanity had ever conceived. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the controls of the stealth insertion craft, her breath creating tiny fog patterns on the helmet's interior. The mission was suicide by any conventional military standard. They would be deploying 6 such platforms across a critical Cariaxian supply corridor, each placement requiring microscopic precision and near impossible navigation, through dense alien sensor networks. Approaching insertion point Alpha, Kai Zheng's voice crackled through the comm system. The young quantum engineer had been part of the initial design team, his hands trembling slightly as he monitored the platform's delicate quantum entanglement systems. Quantum camouflage at 98.7% efficiency. We've got a 3-minute window. Beside Alina, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, no relation, but a tactical genius in her own right, ran final system checks. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, each movement calibrating systems that defied traditional understanding of space, time, and communication. The platform was more than a simple interdiction device. It was a living network of quantum processors, adaptive camouflage systems, and computational matrices that could literally rewrite the laws of resource transmission. Dr. Chen's breakthrough had been understanding the Karyaxian logistical network as a living, breathing ecosystem, and finding its most vulnerable points. Deployment in 3, 2, 1, Kai announced. The platform seemed to melt into the surrounding space, becoming nothing more than another piece of cosmic background radiation. To any Karyaxian sensor system, it would appear as nothing more than random stellar interference. But it was a predator, waiting to strike. Back in the underground bunker, Dr. Aisha Okoy monitored the platform's integration. Her quantum tattoos pulsed with intricate patterns, interfacing directly with the deployment systems. Initial quantum entanglement successful, she muttered. We're in. The risk was immense. Each platform represented months of work, precious resources, and the collective hopes of what remained of human civilization. If even one were detected, the entire strategy would collapse. Alina remembered the briefing. Dr. Marcus Chen's words echoed in her mind. We're not building weapons. We're building a virus. A computational organism that will slowly consume the Karyaxian resource network from within. Their first target was a supply corridor that connected 3 major Karyaxian industrial systems. Trillions of tons of raw materials and critical resources passed through this network every standard cycle. Disrupt this, and the ripple effects would be catastrophic. Zara Kim's voice cut through the tension. Quantum interference pattern stabilizing. We're achieving minimal detection probability of 0.03%. It was working. The first platform began its work silently, imperceptibly. Like a microscopic organism infiltrating a massive biological system, it would slowly introduce quantum uncertainties into the Karyaxian resource transmission networks. Small disruptions, tiny inconsistencies, nothing that would immediately trigger alarm, but enough to create systematic instability. All platforms are green, Kai announced, a note of disbelief in his voice. We're actually doing this. Alina allowed herself a moment of hope. For the first time since the invasion, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting back. Outside the bunker's reinforced walls, the world remained a graveyard. Burned-out cities, shattered orbital platforms. The remnants of a civilization that had been brought to its knees. But here, in this moment, something was changing. The impossible blockade had begun. Deep within the Karyaxian Central Logistics Command, Analyzer Prime Vornak felt something was wrong. The sensation was unlike anything in the collective's millennia of perfectly optimized resource management. Anomalies. Tiny, almost imperceptible disruptions that defied mathematical probability. A supply convoy to the Crimson Nebula manufacturing cluster was 2.7 standard units late. Not significant by most standards, but for the Karyaxian Imperium, such a delay was unprecedented. The quantum routing systems showed impossible fluctuations, microscopic deviations that should not exist. Recalibrate, Vornak commanded the holographic interface. Quantum algorithms danced and reorganized, seeking explanation. Nothing. In the hidden resistance bunker, Dr. Aisha Okoy watched the Karyaxian systems with a predatory smile. First domino, she whispered. The Blockade platforms were working exactly as Dr. Marcus Chen had theorized. They weren't destroying the Karyaxian resource network. They were subtle parasites, introducing quantum uncertainties that would progressively destabilize the entire system. Zara Kim's cybernetic eye flickered rapidly, tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. We're seeing the first systemic responses. Their routing algorithms are trying to compensate, but each correction introduces more instability. Across human refugee settlements, hidden in asteroid fields, deep space stations, and the ruins of planetary bases, hope began to flicker like a small flame in total darkness. On a makeshift communication network cobbled together from salvaged military and civilian tech, reports started trickling in. A Caraxian supply convoy mysteriously rerouted. Critical resource shipments experiencing unexplained delays. Manufacturing centers reporting microscopic inefficiencies that compounded exponentially. Captain Alina Rodriguez studied the emerging pattern. It's like watching a living organism fight an infection it can't understand, she remarked to Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez. Maya nodded, her tactical display showing the growing web of disruption. They're so dependent on perfect efficiency that any deviation becomes catastrophic. We're not fighting them with weapons. We're fighting them with mathematics. The resistance had become a virus within the Caraxian system's bloodstream. In the occupied territories of former human colonies, small resistance cells began to notice changes. Caraxian patrols became less frequent. Supply depots showed signs of increasing tension. The once perfect occupation machinery was developing microscopic cracks. A transmission from a resistance cell on Europa's underground facilities captured the emerging mood. Something's changing. They're not as invincible as they seemed. Dr. Marcus Chen watched the developing strategy with a mix of scientific fascination and personal vindication. His radical theories, once dismissed by the scientific establishment, were proving correct. The Caraxian logistical network was a monoculture, a single-point system so optimized that introducing even minor uncertainties could trigger cascading failures. It's like an ecosystem, he explained to the team. A perfectly managed forest becomes vulnerable to a single type of blight. Diversity creates resilience. Their strength is also their fatal weakness. Analyzer Prime Vornak's report to the Caraxian High Command grew increasingly desperate. The inefficiencies defy all probabilistic models. Our quantum routing systems cannot isolate the source of disruption. What the Caraxian leadership didn't realize was that they were watching the first stages of a computational warfare, unlike anything in galactic history. Humanity wasn't fighting with ships or weapons, but with pure information, introducing chaos into a system that understood only perfect order. The subtle knife had been inserted, and it was beginning to twist. Humanity's real invasion had just begun. The Caraxian Imperium's response came like a tsunami of technological fury. Grand Strategist Selnak assembled the most advanced tactical team in the Imperial arsenal, a collection of quantum computational experts, strategic analysts, and warfare specialists who had never known defeat. Their command vessel, the Absolute Certainty, was a monument to technological supremacy. Nearly 10 kilometers long, its obsidian hull bristled with sensor arrays and computational nodes that could process more information in a nanosecond than most civilizations could in a century. "We will isolate and eliminate the source of disruption," Selnak declared, her multi-jointed fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. In the hidden resistance bunker, alarms screamed. Dr. Marcus Chen's hands moved with surgical precision, his fingers a blur across quantum computing interfaces. "They're coming," he announced, a mixture of terror and exhilaration in his voice. "Full computational assault incoming." Zora Kim's cybernetic eye flickered with cascading lines of code. Defensive protocols engaging, but they're pushing hard, harder than we've ever seen. The Caraxian counteroffensive was nothing short of total war. Entire computational networks were mobilized. Quantum entanglement arrays that could typically map entire star systems were now focused on a single objective: finding and destroying the source of the blockade. Captain Alina Rodriguez watched the tactical displays, her breath tight in her chest. This was the moment everything could be lost. One breakthrough, one moment of detection, and humanity's last hope would be vaporized. Adaptive camouflage at maximum, Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez called out. Quantum uncertainty fields at critical levels. The battle wasn't happening in physical space. It was a war of information, of mathematical probabilities, of computational warfare so advanced it would be indistinguishable from magic to most civilizations. Dr. Aisha Okoye's quantum tattoos pulsed with intricate patterns, interfacing directly with their defensive systems. They're using predictive algorithms we've never seen, she muttered. Each of our defensive measures is being countered almost before we implement them. But humanity had one weapon the Carry-Action couldn't comprehend: unpredictability. Where the Carry-Action system was a perfect, mathematically optimized machine, the human resistance was chaos, improvisation, pure, unbridled creativity. Marcus Chen had designed the Blockade platforms with deliberate imperfections, random fluctuations that defied standard computational analysis. Each platform was part of a living, breathing system that could adapt, change, redirect itself in ways no predictive algorithm could fully anticipate. We're not trying to win, Marcus explained, his eyes burning with an almost religious intensity. We're trying to survive, to introduce enough uncertainty to break their system. The absolute certainty unleashed computational attacks that would have instantly destroyed any known technological civilization. Quantum entanglement arrays that could theoretically map and predict every possible outcome. Computational weapons that could simulate and neutralize threats before they even fully formed. But each attack met with something the Carry-Action couldn't understand: deliberate, calculated chaos. Zelnak watched in growing frustration as computational models failed. Predictive algorithms collapsed. For the first time in the Imperium's history, uncertainty entered their perfect system. Impossible, the Grand Strategist muttered, a hint of something almost like fear entering the typically emotionless voice. In the resistance bunker, a different emotion filled the air. Not certainty, not guaranteed victory, but hope. We're holding, Zara Kim announced, her cybernetic eye casting a blue-green light across her determined face. They can't break us. The breaking point had been reached, and humanity was pushing back. The first liberated colony was nothing more than a frozen asteroid mining settlement in the outer rim of the Epsilon sector. But to humanity, it represented everything. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Resistance flagship, watching as the last Carry-Action defense platforms crumbled. The settlement's survivors, a ragtag group of miners, technicians, and their families, began to emerge from underground shelters, their movements hesitant, almost disbelieving. Broadcast the all clear, she commanded Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez, and prepare for potential secondary Carry-Action responses. Dr. Marcus Chen's computational warfare had transformed from a defensive strategy to an offensive weapon. The Blockade platforms were now active nodes in a living, breathing resistance network. Each platform was more than a disruption device. It was a liberation tool. Zara Kim's cybernetic systems were tracking the computational cascades across multiple star systems. The Carry-Action resource network is fragmenting faster than we predicted, she reported, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and human emotion. We're not just disrupting their systems, we're actively dismantling them. The liberation wasn't just happening through direct conflict. It was a systematic deconstruction of the Carry-Action Imperium's most fundamental strength, its perfectly optimized resource distribution network. On the liberated asteroid, survivors began sharing their stories. Families separated for years. Underground resistance cells that had survived through impossible circumstances. Each story was a testament to human resilience. Dr. Aisha Okoye tracked the computational spread of their liberation strategy. We're introducing what I'm calling possibility vectors, she explained to the team. Each disruption creates exponential opportunities for resistance. It's like we're rewriting the mathematical language of oppression. The Carry-Action response was growing increasingly desperate. Grand Strategist Selnak's computational arrays were now spending more energy trying to predict and contain the spreading resistance than managing their original resource networks. "This is impossible," Selnak muttered, watching computational models collapse in real time. The perfectly managed Imperium was experiencing something it had never known: genuine uncertainty. Marcus Chen understood the deeper strategy. "We're not just fighting a war," he explained to Elena. "We're introducing a fundamental concept of chaos into a system that only understands perfect order. Each liberated colony is a mathematical virus that spreads faster than they can contain it." The resistance was growing. Word spread through underground communication networks. Alien species that had been subjugated by the Caraxian Imperium began to see a path to freedom. The computational warfare was creating more than just a human resistance. It was sparking a galactic revolution. On a dozen different worlds and space stations, resistance cells began to coordinate. The mathematical language of resistance was becoming a universal communication system. Species that had never spoken to each other were now finding common ground through the very computational networks designed to keep them separated. Elena Rodriguez watched the emerging strategy with a sense of both hope and strategic calculation. "We're not just fighting," she told her team. "We're creating a new way of existing in the galaxy." Zara Kim's systems detected the first interspecies communication links forming. Alien resistance groups were sharing computational defense strategies, learning from the human approach to systemic disruption. The Caraxian Imperium was experiencing something it had never known: genuine vulnerability. "The tide is turning," Dr. Aisha Okoy announced, her quantum tattoos pulsing with intricate patterns of possibility and hope. Humanity's computational revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The final assault began not with weapons, but with mathematics. Grand strategist Selmak watched in horror as the Caraxian Imperium's perfect system collapsed from within. What had once been the most sophisticated resource distribution network in galactic history was now a cascading system of computational chaos. Deep within the Resistance Command Center, Dr. Marcus Chen stood before a holographic display that looked more like a living, breathing organism than a traditional tactical map. Quantum entanglement platforms pulsed with intricate patterns of possibility, each node representing not just a point of resistance, but a potential for liberation. "We're not destroying them," Marcus explained to Captain Elena Rodriguez. "We're fundamentally redesigning their entire systemic approach to existence." The liberation had become a galaxy-wide revolution. Species that had been subjugated for millennia now found themselves with a weapon more powerful than any physical armament: the ability to introduce uncertainty into perfect systems. Zara Kim's cybernetic systems were tracking computational cascades across hundreds of star systems. "The Caraxian defensive networks are fragmenting exponentially," she reported. "Each attempt to stabilize creates more instability." On liberated worlds, the transformation was profound. Mining colonies that had been stripped of resources for generations began to rebuild. Communication networks previously suppressed now hummed with collaborative energy. The computational warfare had become something more than a military strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of galactic civilization. Dr. Aisha Okoy's quantum tattoos pulsed with an almost rhythmic intensity. "We're not just fighting," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and human emotion. "We're teaching an entire galactic civilization how to be truly alive." The Caraxian response was increasingly desperate. Grand strategist Selnak deployed computational weapons that would have instantly destroyed any known technological civilization. But each attack met with something the Imperium could not comprehend: deliberate, calculated chaos. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez managed the liberation coordination, her tactical displays showing a living network of resistance and hope. "We're not just freeing individual worlds," she told Elena. "We're creating a new model of galactic cooperation." On a dozen different fronts, the resistance demonstrated its true strength. Where the Caraxian Imperium saw only resources to be managed, humans and their allies saw potential. Where the aliens saw populations to be controlled, the resistance saw communities to be empowered. A transmission came through from a liberated mining colony in the Ta CD system. The colony's leader, A woman who had spent decades under Cariaxian occupation spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. We are not just surviving. We are reimagining what it means to exist. Marcus Chen understood the deeper strategy. The computational warfare was more than a military tactic. It was a philosophical revolution. They were introducing a fundamental concept of adaptive possibility into a system that had only known perfect, rigid control. The final computational assault was unlike anything in galactic history. Resistance platforms created a living, breathing network of possibility. Each node was more than a weapon. It was a point of potential, a seed of freedom. Zelnak watched in growing horror as computational models collapsed. Predictive algorithms failed. The perfect, managed system of the Cariaxian Imperium was coming apart at its most fundamental level. "This is impossible," the grand strategist muttered. The first hint of genuine emotion in millennia of cold, calculated existence. In the Resistance Command Center, Elena Rodriguez watched the final computational wave spread. This was more than a victory. This was a transformation. "We're not just winning," she said softly. "We're showing the galaxy what's possible." The comprehensive victory had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. 5 years after the collapse of the Cariaxian Imperium, humanity stood at the center of a galactic transformation. The conference hall on New Terra, a rebuilt space station that had become the heart of the new interstellar cooperation, was filled with representatives from over 217 different species. Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his worn jacket, looking out over the assembled delegates with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood beside him, no longer a military commander but now a diplomatic architect of the new galactic order. Her hands, once calloused from military controls, now moved with the delicate precision of a negotiator bridging impossible divides. "We're not here to create another empire," Elena addressed the gathered representatives. "We're here to create a living system of mutual possibility." Zura Kim's cybernetic systems processed multiple communication streams simultaneously. What had once been a weapon of resistance was now a tool of unprecedented diplomatic collaboration. Her augmentations, once designed for computational warfare, now facilitated communication between species that had never spoken to each other before. Dr. Aisha Okoye presented the core principle of their new galactic framework, a computational model of governance that emphasized adaptability, diversity, and collective potential. Her quantum tattoos pulsed with intricate patterns that were both a scientific notation and a work of living art. The transformation went beyond political structures. The computational approach that had defeated the Cariaxian Imperium was now being applied to every aspect of galactic civilization. Energy distribution, resource management, technological development. Each system designed not for perfect control, but for continuous adaptation. Marcus Chen reflected on the journey. The blockade that had begun as a desperate survival strategy had become something far more profound. They had not just defeated an empire, they had introduced a new way of existing. Entropy is not destruction, he often explained to younger researchers. It's possibility. Every breakdown is a chance to rebuild more intelligently. The liberated species were reimagining themselves. Technological exchanges happened at a pace that would have been unimaginable under Cariaxian control. A mining species from the Orion cluster shared energy harvesting techniques with aquatic communicators from the Andromeda Rim. A computational species that had existed purely as data networks began to explore physical embodiment. Humanity was no longer seen as a military power, but as the architects of a new galactic potential. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez now led the Galactic Collaborative Research Initiative. Her tactical skills had transformed into an ability to coordinate the most complex collaborative research project in known history. Projects that would have taken centuries under the old system were now being completed in months. A transmission came through from the furthest reaches of explored space, a research outpost documenting the first signs of a completely new form of quantum communication. The message was simple but profound. Possibility confirmed. Zura Kim analyzed the transmission, her cybernetic systems finding patterns that no single species could have discovered alone. "We're not just exploring space," she told Marcus. "We're exploring the fundamental nature of existence." The remnants of the Karyaxian leadership, those who had survived, were now studying this new model of civilization. Not as prisoners, but as students. The species that had once sought total control was learning the power of adaptive potential. Elena Rodriguez looked out at the assembled representatives and saw something that would have been impossible 5 years ago. Not a perfectly managed system, not a hierarchy of control, but a living, breathing network of mutual potential. "We didn't just win a war," she said softly to Marcus. "We reimagined what's possible." As the conference continued, the station's quantum communication arrays pulsed with possibility. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, new potentials were waiting to be discovered. The echoes of defiance had become a symphony of potential.